Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, it's the post-game pod from yet another Timberwolves win. They're now 7-0 at home as they blew out, really, the Philadelphia 76ers by 13 points on Thanksgiving Eve. We'll break down a solid, well-rounded offensive performance, how Nickeil Alexander-Walker did in place of Jaden McDaniels guarding Tyrese Maxey. And we'll talk about, again, a stifling Timberwolves defensive unit. It's all coming on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Happy Thursday, everybody. Happy Thanksgiving Day to those of you in the United States. And it's a victory Thanksgiving Day after a big Wolves win over the Sixers on Thanksgiving Eve, Wednesday night. This is the post-game pod. We're going to talk all about what went right for the Wolves, and it was largely really only things that went right for the Wolves on Wednesday night. It was an impressive all-around performance against, albeit a Sixers team without Joel Embiid, but still, the Wolves, as much as the phrase gets overdone, did take care of business against the team they should have beaten on Wednesday night. We'll break down the offensive performance. We'll break down really a dominant defensive performance and some individual performances as well on the show here today. First of all, though, a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch the show on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X. That's at Beecken and also at Locked On T-Wolves. Don't forget the T. All right, so of course, the Sixers are without Joel Embiid on Wednesday night, second night of a back-to-back. It's actually the first game he's missed this season. And Sixers played an overtime game in Philly on Tuesday night, traveled in. So second night of a back-to-back, no Embiid. Four of their five starters, I guess three of the five, if you take out Embiid, played over 40 minutes on Tuesday night. So yes, the Wolves, I think it was a 4.5-point spread the Wolves were favored by on FanDuel. We talked about that on Wednesday's show. But still, this was, I mean, the Wolves were up 19 points in the first quarter in this game. And yeah, it was closer. It was like 8 points at halftime and it was in single digits like midway through the third. And it was never really like out of reach until the final 3 or 4 minutes, but it was still a well-rounded professional performance. I mean, Tyrese Maxey's been phenomenal so far this season, like really, really good. I would say probably, I mean, I don't know, like top 15 players in the entire NBA, if not top 10 or 12. He's been really good. The Wolves did a fantastic job on him, and I want to get into that a bit. I guess the point here off the top is no Embiid. This is still a team that was 10-4 coming in, still had Tyrese Maxey, still has one of the league's better coaches in Nick Nurse, and a formidable opponent. And again, another example, and I've said this like 6 times in the last 2.5 weeks or so, another game that last season, the Wolves kick this thing away. They say, Embiid's not playing, we're going to win easy, and then they lose, right? At some point, it's going to become routine-ish, but at the moment, it's still very fresh. It's still very refreshing to see the Timberwolves win these games that they should win. And like, it's just night and day for people that watch this team closely the last couple of years or for all of their lives. I'm not used to it yet. So it bears repeating. As long as that remains the case, we have to keep repeating it. The Wolves are beating the teams they're supposed to beat. You can only play who's on the schedule in front of you. And along the way, they've still beaten a full-strength Denver team. They've still beaten a mostly full-strength Boston Celtics team. They've still beaten a Miami team sans Jimmy Butler. They've beaten the Sixers sans Joel Embiid. It's still been an impressive run for the Wolves. And so I don't want to take anything away from them. I just want to acknowledge up front the back-to-back, the rest advantage and the no Embiid. But getting into what the Wolves did really well, they were up 19 points in the first quarter. Second quarter, there were some issues, second chance opportunities for the Sixers, but ultimately for the game, Philly had 17 offensive rebounds. Is that right? 17, I have that in my head. Yeah, 17 offensive rebounds. They only scored 18 points on those offensive rebounds. A lot like the game the other night. I actually think it was last time out against the Knicks, I believe it was, where the Wolves gave up a ton of offensive rebounds. but they didn't actually give up that many points at like actual second chance points. And that goes back to the larger, I guess, thing to celebrate about this year's Wolves team is they've just been so good defensively that you give a team an extra possession, and a lot of times you can survive it because the defense is that good. And you have to credit the Wolves in those specific opportunities for not allowing quick second chance opportunities on the offensive glass, as in putbacks, and also contesting well on the perimeter, because a lot of times those offensive rebounds turn into quick putbacks at the rim or kickouts to open threes. And the Wolves have done a good job the last couple of games. Yeah, they've given up a lot of offensive rebounds, but about a point per possession. And I actually think the Knicks were slightly under a point per possession in terms of those second chance possessions. The Sixers were 18 points on 17 second chance opportunities. You could deal with a point per possession on those second chance opportunities. In a perfect world, you limit them, right? But if you can't, the next best thing is getting that second stop, as difficult as it is and as unideal as it is to have to do it. The Wolves have been really good at it. And that's made a real impact, so far at least in the last couple of games. So second quarter, some second chance opportunities did allow the Sixers to kind of hang around and ultimately get back in. The bigger issue is the Wolves got into the penalty very quickly in the second quarter. The officials were a little whistle happy, but the Wolves did get a bit handsy, and it just, like, they were up 10 with a couple of minutes, or really like 30 seconds to play in the second quarter. They turn it over on one end on what could have been a foul call. Then they foul on the other end. So now it's an 8-point game. And really it should have been a 10, 11, 12-point Wolves lead. It was an 8-point lead at halftime because of that swing. There were a couple of those where the Wolves just got a bit handsy on defense, and it hurt them. The offense stagnated. Anthony Edwards, though, was good enough in the second quarter that really it allowed the Wolves to maintain that, what was ultimately an 8-point lead at halftime. Second quarter was easily the roughest quarter for the Wolves in this game. Again, fouling too much, offensive rebounds for Philly, and stagnant offense that really just kind of leaned on Anthony Edwards' greatness, frankly, to kind of buoy them. And it worked to an extent, right? The Wolves were -9 for the quarter, but again, up 8 at halftime. In the third quarter, the Wolves offense just had more flow. The Sixers ultimately just didn't have enough firepower with no Joel Embiid to keep pace with the Wolves offense that actually, for the most part in this game, played fairly well. I'm going to throw up the stats here on YouTube. I'm going to throw up the overall stat line for the game. The Wolves shot over 48% from the field. They were 10 of 26 on three-pointers. You'd love to see them attempt a few more. I've been saying that all year long. They only turned it over 11 times, and they were only a -2 on the glass. Like, in general, the Wolves were fine offensively in this game. 26, the volume's a little low on threes, but it's over 38%. And when you hold your opponent to 22% from three, that'll play, right? And then from the line, the Wolves only got there 24 times, or I shouldn't say only. They got there 24 times, which was 6 less than the Sixers. They didn't shoot them at an extremely efficient clip. 16 to 24, that's 67%. But they shot well enough from 2 and well enough from 3 to kind of paper that over. So, and again, only 11 turnovers. You can live with that. So a well-rounded offensive performance for the Wolves in this game. And I would say one of their better all around. And like, Philly's a decent defensive team. I think they came in like 10th or 11th in defensive rating, maybe even a little bit better than that. Really a top 10 defense. Granted, no Embiid, but the Wolves were this is one of their more complete offensive games, in my opinion. And I want to talk about just how well-rounded it was, and how the offense was distributed. I also want to hone in on Nickeil Alexander-Walker and the fantastic job he did on Tyrese Maxey. Not only either, but in general, the Wolves team defense, how impressive it was in this game. And I know we've said that so much this season, but it really felt like, sans the second quarter, and especially first quarter, third quarter, early fourth quarter, this defense was at a level that we've only seen it at a few times this year. I really believe that, even with no Jaden McDaniels. So I want to get into all that here next. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right, let's talk about Let's talk about Nah first, and the job that Nickeil Alexander-Walker did on Tyrese Maxey in this game, and then I want to get into a bit further. Well, I guess along with that, the overall team defensive effort. So with no Jaden McDaniels, the job of guarding Maxey, who was far and away the biggest offensive threat for the Sixers in this game, fell to Alexander Walker. And he did an absolutely phenomenal job. And it wasn't only him, but Maxey had 16 and 8 assists, but it took him 19 shots to get a 16 points, 7 of 19 shooting, 0 of 5 on 3-point attempts, only attempted 4 free throws and turned it over 3 times, was a minus 18 for the game. And again, this is a player who's been one of the better players in the league, has easily been playing at an all-star level to this point. And Alexander Walker was in his jersey all night long. Along with that, the Wolves defense in general, rotations were really impressive in this game. Just, and I mean defensive rotations, not like Finch's substitution patterns, but defensive rotations. When guys were fighting through screens, first and foremost, so Mike Conley's great at that. Alexander Walker's good at it. Stunting, switching when necessary, and Finch doesn't like to switch, but occasionally you have to, just based on if you're cross-matched, etc., depending on how the possession unfolds. Stunting, like Mike Conley is an example of somebody who, there was one possession, or actually there are a couple possessions really that stand out to me, where Conley was stunting, getting back, and in one case I'm thinking it was on the right side of the floor. Ant recovers, Conley gets back and is basically at the elbow, stunts to the other side of the floor and helps deter a potential 3-point shot. On the other side, late in the game, there was a possession that had featured both of these things where Conley stunted at a potential perimeter shooter. Cat and Rudy ended up having to switch in the paint. And then Rudy comes out, I think, basically because of his presence, there isn't a shot attempt, deters that, comes back into the paint, and Cat shuts down, I think it was D'Anthony Melton, in the paint, just like straight stuffs him in the paint. Just a really, really impressive wall up by Towns, really. But the possession as a whole, Conley, Cat, Rudy, all were very involved in stopping that possession and keeping the Sixers from even getting a shot up on the rim. Across the board, Conley was a huge part of it in this game, and his line doesn't stand out. He actually only played, 23 minutes in this game, period. But defensively, he was extremely active. We saw Alexander Walker being extremely active on the perimeter. Ant, I thought, was good defensively in this game. Off the bench, Kyle Anderson was active. Karl-Anthony Towns had active hands. He got credited with 2 steals. I don't know. Like, there were 2-3 plays at least where Cat got a hand on a ball. There was one, I don't even know if it went down as a steal or what happened exactly, but it was like he deflected a pass from behind, and like Michael Grady on the call didn't even realize it was deflected. He just thought the Sixers threw the ball away. But Cat essentially stuffed the pass and it rolled off the hands of Max or whoever it was. Like, Cat was very impressive defensively in this game with his activity level. And that example of that, or that possession I use as an example of Cat and Rudy together, that was impressive as well. Just a strong defensive effort from Minnesota, holding yet another team under 40% shooting. To see the Wolves play the way they did against the Knicks and the Sixers back at home Monday and Wednesday of this week after a rough defensive end to the road trip against a Zionless Pelicans team, obviously the schedule loss in Phoenix last Wednesday, to see the defense bounce back in the way that it has over the last 2 has been so great. If I'm being honest, I had a little bit of concern that there was going to be some backsliding here, but to hold another opponent under 100, to hold another opponent under 40% shooting, 22% from outside the arc for the Sixers in this game. Credit to the Wolves perimeter defenders, for that. And then also Rudy, another fantastic game. He's back to being nimble. He's back to being proactive defensively. 13 points, 11 rebounds, 3 blocks in this game for Rudy Gobert, and altered so many shots in the paint, so many shots. And if somebody, if you go back and watch all the Sixers attempts in the paint, I mean, how many times did Paul Reed have a shot, within 5 feet of the basket, and it just was completely altered by D'Anthony Melton, Tobias Harris? Each of those guys were just stymied by Rudy Gobert. And 3 blocks is a nice game, but he altered probably another 7 or 8 shots, and that's not an exaggeration. Cat had 2 blocks of his own, so Cat and Rudy combined for 5 blocks in this game. They each had 11 rebounds. Just a phenomenal all-around defensive performance. The offense for the Wolves, and I want to be clear, that was for me the most impressive thing about this game was the activity level on defense, especially the first quarter was an absolute clinic. Go back and watch that first quarter, and it's a ton of fun, unless you're a Sixers fan. The Sixers scored 20 points in the first quarter. I don't have that shooting percentage in front of me, but like they hardly got a shot off is what it felt like, because the Wolves defense was swarming. Nas came in the game, same thing, active hands, denying catches, tipping passes, getting hands on rebounds, tipping them out. Like just across the board, impressive defensive performance from this Wolves team, for sure. Offensively, a very well-rounded performance from the Wolves there as well. Ant had 31. It was a very professional Anthony Edwards performance. And we'll talk more about it in studs and duds here, individual studs and duds. We'll do last segment. He had 31 and 22 shots. We'll take that every day of the week. Cat had 23. Those are your two leading scorers. Nobody else had more than 13, but you had 13 from Rudy off the bench. You had 13 from Naz Reid, who played very well. You had 12 from Shake Milton, who played a solid game against his former team. And that was really all you needed offensively for the Wolves. Nothing that like jumps off the page offensively, just good ball movement in general, except for maybe the second quarter. Making open threes when they had the opportunity. Again, you'd like the volume to be a little bit higher. You'd like them to make a few more shots at the line. The other thing would be fast break points. Minnesota won fast break points in this game 19-4. At one point, it was, I think, 17-0 early in the fourth quarter. Fast break points, Wolves versus Sixers. So that was actually one of my keys to the game. I thought I had the graphic in here. I don't. One of my keys to the game on Wednesday's show was force the issue, run in transition, make the Sixers run the floor, because the Wolves actually have been a very slow team pace-wise. If you look at all the pace statistics, the Wolves are slow this season. That should change, because the Wolves have so many opportunities to run because they force so many opponent misses. Running off of misses is something the Wolves should be doing more of. The Sixers are also comfortable playing slow, and nobody on their team really wants to push the pace except for Maxey. So when given the opportunity, I wanted the Wolves to push the pace in this game, and they did that. They turned the Sixers over 14 times in this game. They also had 19 fast break points. Philly only had 4 fast break points in this game. The Wolves were a plus 14 in paint points. Good to see. Really not a surprise against the Embiid-less Sixers team. I mean, Batum, Harris, Marcus Morris, and I guess Rocco. Those are their bigs, right? So of course the Wolves should have dominated in the paint, and they did. So it was a good game in that regard as well. So yeah, I mean, my key takeaway is number one, it's the defense. It's the swarming the Wolves did, especially in the first quarter. The job Alexander Walker did on Maxey, the stunting switching of Conley and other perimeter defenders, and also Rudy and Cat just working their tails off in the paint once again for the Wolves. Secondarily, it would be the well-rounded offensive attack, and the job that the Wolves did to kind of spread the wealth offensively and be opportunistic when given chances to score. And then also related to that, transition offense, getting some easy buckets that way to help kind of build that initial lead that they never really relinquished. Yes, it was single digits early in the fourth quarter, but for the most part, that lead was built. Transition offense had a huge hand in that, and also points in the paint. And again, yes, no Embiid. I get that. But still, only being a -2 on the glass against Philly was also a big thing. It was a big part of this thing for the Wolves. All right, let's close the show here with individual studs and duds. We'll take a peek up to see what's up next here as well for the Wolves. We'll do all of that here next. All right, let's close this thing out by talking individual studs and duds. Pretty easy one today to parse here. Number one, Anthony Edwards, 31 points, 50% from the floor, 11 of 22, greater than 50% outside the arc, 5 of 9 on threes, only got to the line 4 times, made all 4 of his free throw attempts, had a couple of and ones, I believe, of those 4. I think he had one foul where he got to shoot 2 free throws and then 2 separate trips on and ones. So he was, quick math, 6 of 13. Am I doing that math right? Yeah, 6 of 13 on 2-point attempts in this game. I thought the shot balance was okay. I actually didn't feel like he shot too many mid-range jumpers in this game. He had 6 assists, 6 rebounds, like 31, 6, and 6, plus 2 steals, only 2 turnovers. This was the best game Ants played I would say in like a week, right? I'm trying to think back to the Golden State games, maybe the first Golden State game, but the last couple of games have been just kind of pedestrian type games, especially given how well he played the first couple of weeks of the season. This was a really strong Anthony Edwards game. Again, 31, 6 and 6, 2 steals, 50% from the floor, 5 of 9 on threes, 4 of 4 at the line, a plus 19, the second best mark on the Wolves. My second stud has to be Karl-Anthony Towns. It was actually a relatively quiet 2010 game for Cat, and he doesn't get all that many 2010 games anymore. Not as many as he did, pre-Rudy, pre-Ant. 23 points, 11 rebounds for Cat, 3 assists, 2 steals, 2 blocks. He stuffed the stat sheet, a plus 18 on the night, 9 of 19 shooting from the field, 1 of 2 outside the arc. Again, the volume of three-point attempts is still too low for Karl-Anthony Towns. In fact, I don't believe he attempted a three-point shot until the second half, if I'm not mistaken. Was 1 of 2 from outside the arc, 4 of 5 at the line. Just a balanced performance. We already gave him some flowers for his defense. Was super good on that side of the floor again as well. And we talked about this a little on Wednesday's show. If this keeps up, people are going to have to, that narrative about Cat and his defense is going to have to change. I get we're only 14 in, but at some point, he's working his tail off defensively, and he was legitimately good. Once again, not just like, oh, he didn't hurt them. He was good defensively. Really, really good in this game. Third stud's a little bit more difficult. I mean, I could go Rudy. You could go Alexander Walker. You could go Naz Reid. I actually think I'm gonna go Naz Reid. And you could argue for Rudy. You could argue for Alexander Walker. Certainly, Naz Reid, though, especially in the first quarter, helped build this massive, what was a 19-point lead. I think actually reached 21 at one point, maybe early second quarter. But Naz was a big part of building that. He came in and was ready to go. 13 points, 4 rebounds, 6 of 13 shooting. Naz never met a shot he didn't like. He was somehow still third on the team in field goal attempts, despite playing just 22 minutes. 1 of 4 outside the arc. I think he hit his first 3-point attempt. 3 steals and a block. I mentioned earlier, he had active hands. The second he got into the game, was very active defensively and on the glass, and was a big part of building the initial lead. Was quieter later in the game, but again, building the lead is the most important piece of the whole thing, right? I mentioned Rudy's line earlier, 13-11, 3 assists and 3 blocks. The 3 assists for Rudy's a nice number, 6 of 8 shooting. Only attempted 2 free throws in this game, was 1 of 2 at the line. So a solid Rudy game. We talked about his defense. We talked about Alexander Walker as well. 7 points, 6 rebounds, 4 assists and a block for Na in 29 minutes, 3 of 6 from the field. Shake Milton, a good game against his former team. 12 points in 21 minutes on 7 shots. Finally knocked down a three-pointer. It feels like it's been weeks. It may literally have been weeks since he knocked down a 3. Got to the line 3 separate times. Was 5 of 6 on free throws. 0 rebounds, though, for Shake in 21 minutes, which isn't ideal, but a good game. Troy Brown Jr. did see a few rotation minutes in the first half, and I think it was like, if I remember right, end of second quarter and end of first quarter, end of third quarter maybe, and then some garbage time moments. So limited Troy Brown minutes. He did have one nice contested offensive rebound. That was really the only thing he did. But I think we'll see a few of those kind of fringe rotation minutes. Finch really used 8 guys primarily. And then, Shake played 21 minutes, Naz 22, Kyle Anderson 28. The only other guy that played rotation minutes was Troy Brown, played essentially 5 rotation minutes before the final 2 minutes that were garbage time. So it was like an 8-man rotation plus 5 minutes for Brown. We'll see if that changes here moving forward. I think it's going to be a little opponent dependent. But it'd be interesting to watch how much Finch gives Brown in terms of how much playing time he actually gets. I don't have any duds for this game. Like, nobody played poorly. Like, Conley only played 23 minutes. He had 8 assists and 1 turnover. We talked about how good he was defensively. Obviously, he's not a dud. Talked about how Shake played well. Naz played well. Kyle Anderson was good. Like, to a man, this Timberwolves team played well in this game. Like, I could have argued for basically all 8 guys that played heavy rotation minutes to be studs in this game. And it was just a professional, I think well-rounded and professional is how I would describe this game. A 13-point win over a very good Sixers team, a well-coached Sixers team, a relatively deep Sixers team. Sans their best player in Joel Embiid, but still with another all-star in Tyrese Maxey. Good to see the Wolves pull out this win in relatively easy fashion. And now, big game Friday night, Sacramento comes to town. It's a play-in. Sorry, I keep calling it play-in. I just have tournament and play-in association in my head. An in-season tournament game. The Wolves that would actually clinch a berth in the quarterfinals, if they win on Friday night against Sacramento. It's the first home game that the Wolves have in the in-season tournament. So that'll be fun to see that court in action. And that's a 7 p.m. tip Friday night at home against the Sacramento Kings. Saturday off, travel to Memphis to take on the currently woeful Memphis Grizzlies. Of course, no Ja, no Steven Adams. It's a banged up and shorthanded Grizzlies team. That's a 5 p.m. Central tip at Memphis Sunday. So Friday night against Sacramento is the big one. At Memphis is, of course, the potential kind of trap game between Sacramento and then back home for Oklahoma City on Tuesday. So the one-game road trip to play a bad team on the road on a Sunday, 5 p.m. Central, bit of a early evening, late matinee type game. That could be a trap game. We'll talk more about that later in the week. I guess Friday. But first up, though, the Kings Friday night. We'll preview that matchup on Friday's show. We'll talk about what to look forward to against Sacramento. Talk a little about the Memphis and Oklahoma City matchups. Those are upcoming. That'll be Friday's show. There will be a live postcast again. If you did miss the live postcast, it's actually the audio. If you're listening on audio feed right now, it's the episode before this one that you're listening to now is the live postcast that Luke Inman did with Tyler Metcalf of Canis Hoopus. That video is on YouTube live after every game over at Locked On Sports Minnesota on YouTube. They'll do it again Friday night. I believe same people. I think it's Luke. I think it's Tyler. So go check that out live after the game on Friday, Black Friday. And then that audio will be in the feed late Friday night, early Saturday. I'll do a post-game pod on Monday from the Memphis game. So we won't have a dedicated post-game pod from the Kings game Friday, but you will have the live postcast. We'll do a show Monday that'll recap Sunday's game against Memphis. We'll also talk about anything significant from Friday against the Kings. And of course, live postcasts after every game on Locked On Sports Minnesota on YouTube. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to shows, you can listen to Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.